Hello, I am queer historian Jacob Hogue, and I'm happy to celebrate 50 years of pride activism in Cincinnati. It was audacious to march in those first parades in a way that I don't think we truly understand or appreciate anymore. And that is because, quite frankly, our history has been taken from us. Cincinnati has always been positioned as this sort of backwater conservative city without a gay history, but Cincinnati was the Paris of America in the mid to late 19th century and holds a special and unique place in the annals of queer history in America. Cincinnati newspapers reported on the existence of people we would now refer to as LGBTQ+ before the city was even officially incorporated. And as the city flourished into one of the largest in the country over the next few decades, it both attracted and birthed queer people who simply defied explanation. Charlotte Cushman, a queer woman and one of the first celebrity actresses in the country, owned the Spencer House in Cincinnati's public landing in the 1850s until her death in 1876. Annie Hindle, the country's first male impersonator, a person who married 2 women and 2 men, lived at Ray Street in the 1870s and on Mound Street in the 1890s. Cincinnati was home to some of the first court cases concerning homosexuality in the region, home to some of the earliest intersex realignment surgeries in the country. And there were more drag queens and kings performing on Vine Street in the late 19th century than there are today. From painters to politicians, from students to teachers, from astronomers to criminal masterminds, Cincinnati has given birth to people who, from the margins and from the spotlight, have shaped queer history in ways that we have yet to discover. Cincinnati police and moral authorities had always policed gender deviance, but the concepts of heterosexuality and homosexuality didn't enter the average person's home until the late 19th or even the early 20th centuries. Then on homosexuality and other gender deviance was considered a medical problem or something that could be cured and fixed. Cincinnati's queer people who had lived in an era of quasi-invisibility found that as medical men attempted to discern the cause of sexual inversion, that moral reformers and police would take that knowledge and visibility and weaponize it. Queer people for the next few decades were treated with scorn and an increasing amount of government-sanctioned discrimination. At best, they were pitied as sick and in need of medical treatment. The shadow of that discourse looms over our conversations about transgender people even today. Despite that, queer people in Cincinnati found unique ways to blend in and find one another. Cincinnati had its first gay bar called the Green Door during Prohibition, although we don't know the exact location of it because it was only talked about through word of mouth and was highly secretive. The Queen City was home to lesbian suffragettes who corresponded with the leading feminists of the women's rights movement of the early 20th century. It was also home to transgender men such as Freddie Frey and Charlie Howard, who was only discovered on the coroner's table in 1948. It was also home to a vibrant black queer culture in Cincinnati's West End in the 1940s and 1950s. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, queer people in Cincinnati were branded as communist sympathizers and removed from their jobs. They were susceptible to blackmail schemes that ranged from low-level to nationally syndicated operations. And their sexualities were used in defense of those who committed crimes against them, and what were known as gay panic defenses. They were subject to daily violence and harassment from police who, by 1962, were combating what they called a shocking moral situation. From 1962 to 1964, things got a lot worse for the LGBTQIA+ community in Cincinnati. Crime reporters and police officials began citing the Homo Problem as a justification to spend millions to surveil and arrest homosexuals hanging out in downtown Cincinnati. And they created a task force specifically designed to entrap vulnerable young gay men having sex. Right where I am sitting, in the beautiful Burnett Woods Park, police entrapped dozens, if not hundreds, of suspected homosexuals by surveilling these hangouts, studying gay lingo and movement, and eventually pretending to be gay themselves. City officials lobbied for medical studies to be done to combat the problem. Permits were denied to gay bars and other places featuring female impersonators. And by 1964, the city government passed an ordinance banning men from wearing female clothing in public. The city had always targeted cross-dressing men and women, but now they had a broad law with which to use to wipe out the nascent queer subculture in the Queen City. Although their methods were extremely effective, they also served as a rallying cry for the city's increasingly marginalized queer community. By the late 1960s, like most queer people in America, the LGBTQ+ community in Cincinnati had had enough. Cincinnatians began challenging discriminatory laws in court and began to form the city's first gay rights organizations, then called homophile organizations. Although the Stonewall riots are reported to have galvanized LGBTQ+ liberation in America, in Cincinnati, the movement had already begun. Cincinnati has earned its place in shaping the international LGBTQ+ liberation movement, and we should all take pride in that. The first marchers in Cincinnati's Gay Pride Parade did so with over 100 years worth of reasons not to do so. They marched in spite of what it cost them: their freedom, their jobs, their homes, their families, and even their lives. While it's important to celebrate queer pride as an activist benchmark, it's equally important to recognize our community's prelude to activism: surviving and finding one another. Happy 50 years of pride, Queen City. Let us hope that our next 50 years of activism make someone feel as proud as I feel now.